Hello YouTube, this is Asatsu5, and today I want to talk about vegans. And I don't know if you call it veganism or whatever. I don't know what I'm going to call this video. Might just call it Let's Talk About Vegans. But here recently, I watched one of, what's his name? I can't believe I forgot his name. Joe Rogan Experience. I was watching Joe Rogan Experience as a podcast, and I don't always agree with Joe Rogan, but I enjoy his podcast videos. And he was talking to this restaurant owner, and these vegans are protesting his restaurant for seems like several months now. And they started off with just a few, and now it's a lot of people, and they're turning really aggressive. And they're calling the customers that go in there and eat, murderers, and they have megaphones and they're shouting at the customers and shouting at the thing. And the restaurant owner got a deer leg and started butchering it in front of them because he was tired of it. He was like, well, maybe this will scare him off, which it didn't. But the point of this little discussion is, when does protest turn into harassment? Surely freedom of speech, freedom of assembly is protected by the U.S. Constitution, but harassment is not. And I think that the best protester that ever existed was Martin Luther King and the civil rights activists. They knew how, circa 1960s civil rights activists, those other civil rights activists that I don't think know how to protest. And we've seen that in the news. And Kaepernick, I would say, is a less extreme example of that. Anyways, I'm going to say the 1960s Martin Luther King era protesters were kings of protest. And they never harassed anybody. They sat in seats that they weren't allowed to sit in at the time. They marched and sang, "We shall not persevere," or "We shall persevere." They were willing to get hosed by high-pressure water hoses without fighting back, without retaliating. Not that that's getting shot with a water hose is a good thing, but the fact is that they peacefully protested and they accomplished everything they wanted to accomplish. And you see a lot of social justice warriors. They yell, they scream, they punch, they throw blood on people, they call them Nazis or whatever. And it's one thing to have a discussion and to say, hey, that guy has some totalitarian features or tendencies, but to just randomly point at... I saw a video of this one social justice warrior. He was talking to the cameraman about this so-called neo-Nazi. He had a shaved head, and the cameraman, who was not a social justice warrior, said, "Hey, dude, come over here." And the social justice warrior, had the colored hair and weird haircut, and you could tell that he was on the left side. And he got the bald man that had the shaved head and said, "Hey, what's with your shaved head? This guy says you look like a neo-Nazi. What's the deal with that?" And he says, "Well, I was in the military and I had an injury that messed with my hair growth." He's like, "Instead of looking funny, I just shaved the whole thing." See, a lot of these protesters are not using critical thinking, which is something that they're supposed to be teaching in college. It was mandatory class to take student success and critical thinking at my junior college. But anyways, to me, if you're yelling at the customers, making them feel uncomfortable, you're calling them names that really doesn't define, like when they use the term murderer, they're not using that word correctly. Murder only happens between two humans. Murder doesn't happen with a human and an animal, a human and a bug, a human and a plant. That's not murder. So they're misusing the word, and they're calling these people horrible names, yelling at them, making them, ruining their eating experience. This is a nice restaurant. It's a small, nice restaurant. And to keep things in perspective, this restaurant cares about the food that they serve. It's pretty much, farm to table. They get all the food they get is from an hour away from their restaurant. They get one deer donated to them a year. The owner hunts, but he hunts because he's against factory farms. He's against the mass production. The chickens, cooped up in cages type of thing. He cares about his meat. He wants his meat to have a happy life, and then to he doesn't necessarily like killing the animal, but he wants the animal to have a happy life, and then he harvests that animal and eats it. And there's nothing wrong with that. So that's the first thing I wanted to talk about, is that where does protest stop and harassment end? Because protest is protected, harassment is not. And we have clearly seen on the news many instances of harassment and riots, and they're wrongfully called protest because they're not protest. Protest is never violent, and it's never a harassment thing. You might not be happy with the protesters holding signs in front of your business, but there's a difference between holding signs and getting petitions. And there's a difference between that and yelling at people, using megaphones, throwing fake blood on them. There's a difference between that. And I hope that vegans will learn to appreciate that. Now, here's another feature I want to talk about when it comes to veganism. The whole point of veganism is it cannot harm the animal. And there's generally no animal products, but there's something interesting that honey can be both vegan and non-vegan, and it's kind of a debate within the vegan community whether honey is vegan or not, because the honey is an animal product, but it's possible to extract that honey without harming the animal. In order for something to be vegan, you cannot steal from the animal, you cannot harm the animal when taking the product. Now, you could say that taking the honey is stealing, but keep in mind, the bees only use a small amount of that honey. And if you're able to harvest that honey without destroying the hive or smoking them out, which is possible, then it's technically vegan. And many people have, and this is the main point I'm about to make, vegan meat. I'm talking about the possible future of vegan meat, and that is meat that's grown as a plant. There's many people that said, what if we grow meat as a plant? It has no soul, it has no life. It's just, basically growing a plant, but it tastes like beef. It's basically a beef flower or a fruit. You water it, you give it nutrients, it grows, but it's not a plant, it's meat, but it has no soul to it, has no face. What if that was possible? Wouldn't that be great? We wouldn't have to harm any animals, but we can get the protein that we need, we can get all the vitamins, and we can get the creatine that we need, which meat is a major influence on brain development. But anyways, they talk about how cool would that be to have meat that's actually grown as a plant. And on the surface, it sounds good if this technology existed. But I'm going to argue that it might not be a good thing. And keep in mind, I'm a hunter. I don't hunt right now. I'm not able to hunt right now due to money. But I have hunted animals. And I can talk about how the first animal I shot, I was happy at first, but then later that night, I felt remorse for that animal. I had to think about it. I was like, should I hunt anymore? Should I ever hunt again? And I came to the conclusion that I killed the animal and ate it. It served its purpose. And, that hunting isn't necessarily bad. Torturing animals is bad. And I didn't torture the animal. I harvested and ate it. But it was a real internal conflict about the first animal that I killed. I had to think it through. I had to justify it. So I'm not against necessarily cruelty-free meat, if you want to call it that. But let's just say we can grow chicken, we can grow cow, we can grow pork like a plant. Well, what does that do to those animals? Well, they no longer have value. They will no longer be bred. on a professional level. A lot of these animals don't have survival skills, and they'll basically be left to fend for themselves. And it's very possible, since there's no demand for them, that cows are not necessarily trainable animals that you use in circuses and stuff. But there'll be no purpose for them. So why should we protect them or invest money into them? And it's a very real possibility that we'll just let them grow out in the wild, and they might come extinct, or they might overpopulate. Keep in mind that I've got a phone call from Willis, Texas. I don't know who that is, so I'm going to hang up. But there's no more use for the animal, therefore there's no value to that animal. There's no reason to throw money at it. And it's been said, if you want to protect a new species, treat it like a buck, treat it like a deer, or treat it like a cow. If you want to endanger a species to be populated, raise it in mass quantities, and protect it, and give value to that animal. That's why game wardens are a big deal, because deer are very valuable. Game animals are very valuable. Fish are very valuable. So that's why we pay money to people to protect them, because they have value. Now, if we just grew meat without a soul, these animals would have no value. We might not have a reason to hurt them, but we would have no reason to protect them either. And the populations to predator to ungulate might go out of whack. The populations might encroach on civilian or human life. If a bunch of cows are overpopulating in the fields and the forest, and they move into a highway, well, then we have a new problem. And so once an animal has a value, whether it be a cow, a chicken, a deer, a bear, a moose, or even the African animals like lions, Cape buffalo, elephant, they have value because they have meat, they have skin, they have bones. There's a comedy associated with the product of the animal. Keep in mind, the only thing keeping African animals in check, and when I say in check, I mean protected, is the trophy hunters. If it wasn't for the trophy hunters, there would be no game wardens. There would be no reason to protect those animals, and they would be open to poaching by people who want to use their horns for some kind of Chinese erection medicine. So giving value to the elephant, giving value to the Cape buffalo, because we want to hunt them. And keep in mind, when a trophy hunter hunts, he's not hunting for food, he's hunting for the trophy. And on the surface, that sounds really bad, but the meat goes to the villages. The money goes to the villages. The villages make a lot of money off of rich guys who want to hunt African animals. So it helps develop that whole economy, and you have extra money to pay game wardens to protect the animals from poachers, and then ensuring that those animals to hunt in the future. That gives more money to the economy, more money to the villages, gives food to the villages, and it pays the game wardens to protect the animals from poachers. Those animals has value. Now, there's an interesting concept. You're thinking, well, what about endangered animals? You don't want to hunt endangered animals. Well, that is actually possible to do it ethically. Now, I wouldn't want to hunt tigers in the same manner, but there is such a thing as a green hunt. And a green hunt is when you pay to hunt a rhinoceros, or I guess any animal, with a tranquilizer gun. You do the same thing you do with hunting regular animals, but you tranquilize the rhino, go get your picture taken with it, and the rhino is relatively okay, just wakes up wondering what happened, and you get your trophy, and that rhino has value. Even though it's endangered and we want to protect it because it's endangered, we still give it a monetary value. So I think that's very important to consider. if you grow meat like a plant, to me, you're taking value away from the actual living meat animals that have a soul. They're no longer worth throwing money at. They're no longer valuable, and they're no longer contributing to society. So keep in mind, I'm a hunter, or at least I used to be. I still enjoy hunting. I still want to hunt, but I'm not bloodthirsty. I'm not a murderer. I don't kill people. I kill animals, and I use their meat. I even attempted to tan the leather once, but I sucked at it. And the money I pay to hunt pays for game wardens to protect the animals from poachers, people who take it illegally. And you don't want people taking animals illegally, because then they take too much and then the animal becomes extinct. So it's kind of a necessary evil to have people to pay to hunt, to do it legally, to pay for the game wardens. So that's just some food for thought. I wanted to talk about, when does protest become harassment? And if we grow meat like plants, does that take away from the value of the living animal that has a life, has a when I say has a soul, I don't mean they literally have a soul like humans, and some people might disagree with me on that, but they have a face. I'm going to use that term. They have a face. And if you take value from those animals that have a face, there's no reason to protect them anymore, and they could be a nuisance to humans in the civilized world. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm Satsu5, and I'm out.